The forest was alive with whispers and an unnatural chill. As David and Kyle stumbled through the dense underbrush, their breaths ragged and shallow. The camera in Kyle's hand trembled as he tried to keep it steady. They hadn't even set up camp before things went wrong. It started with the guttural growl, low and menacing, coming from somewhere in the shadows. They dismissed it as a wild animal, but now that theory was impossible to believe. Whatever stalked them wasn't an animal. "Did you hear that?" Kyle hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. David didn't respond. He was too focused on the sound of branches snapping behind them. It wasn't random. The noise followed them, deliberate and methodical, like a predator herding its prey. "Keep moving," David muttered, gripping the machete he'd brought as a precaution. Now it felt laughably inadequate. A sudden flash of movement to their right made them freeze. Kyle swung the camera around, its light catching a brief glimpse of something. The figure was tall, unnaturally tall, and it moved on all fours with a jerky, unnatural gait. Its eyes reflected the light, glowing yellow in the darkness before vanishing again. "What the hell was that?" Kyle's voice cracked, panic setting in. David grabbed his arm. "Run, now." They bolted through the forest, branches slapping their faces and tearing at their clothes. The growl came again, louder this time, reverberating through the trees. Behind them, heavy footsteps pounded the ground, closing the distance. David risked a glance over his shoulder and immediately regretted it. The creature was gaining on them. Its elongated limbs moved with terrifying speed, and its face, a grotesque blend of human and beast, was fixed in a snarl that revealed jagged yellow teeth. Kyle screamed as he tripped over a root, sprawling onto the ground. The camera skidded away, its light flickering. David turned back, hesitating only a moment before helping his friend to his feet. The creature was nearly upon them. It let out a deafening roar, the sound so primal and raw that David's legs nearly gave out from fear. "Go," David shouted, dragging Kyle forward. They burst into a small clearing, their breaths coming in gasps. Kyle snatched up the camera, still recording despite their terror. He turned it toward the forest edge, where the creature's silhouette appeared. It stood upright now, its limbs too long, its shoulders hunched unnaturally. The yellow eyes burned into them, unblinking. "Oh God, it's real," Kyle whispered, backing away. "It's real." The creature lunged, crossing the clearing in a blur. David swung the machete in desperation, catching it on the arm. The blade cut deep, and the creature let out an ear-splitting screech, black, viscous liquid oozing from the wound. It recoiled, but only for a moment. The injury seemed to enrage it. "Run!" David screamed, shoving Kyle ahead of him. The forest became a chaotic maze as they sprinted blindly, the creature's roars echoing around them. Kyle's camera swung wildly, capturing fleeting images of the nightmare behind them. Clawed hands reaching out, twisted limbs crashing through the underbrush, and those unrelenting yellow eyes. David's lungs burned and his legs threatened to give out, but the thought of stopping was unthinkable. He could hear the creature gaining again, its guttural breathing sending shivers down his spine. Kyle stumbled ahead, his camera still rolling despite everything. The ground suddenly dropped away beneath them. They tumbled down a steep incline, rolling and crashing into the foliage below. When they finally stopped, David groaned in pain, his body battered and bruised. Kyle lay a few feet away, clutching the camera like a lifeline. "Are you okay?" David rasped, crawling toward him. Kyle nodded weakly, but his face was pale, and his eyes were wide with terror. "It's still coming." David's heart sank. He could hear it too. The creature was above them, its growls echoing down the slope. It wasn't giving up. "We have to keep moving," David said, pulling Kyle to his feet. They stumbled through the forest, the incline making every step a struggle. The creature's growls grew louder, closer. It was toying with them, driving them deeper into its territory. The realization hit David like a punch to the gut. They weren't escaping. They were being hunted. Ahead, they spotted a decaying structure. An old cabin, half hidden by vines and overgrowth. It was their only option. They sprinted toward it, bursting through the rotted door and slamming it shut behind them. The cabin was dark and reeked of mildew and decay, but it felt like a temporary refuge. "Barricade the door," David ordered, shoving a broken table against it. Kyle helped, his hands trembling. The camera's light swept across the room, revealing strange symbols carved into the walls. They looked ancient, almost ritualistic. David had no time to wonder what they meant. The creature's claws raked against the door, the wood splintering under the force. Kyle pointed the camera at the door, his breathing audible in the recording. "This isn't going to hold," he whispered. David scanned the room, his eyes landing on a rusted oil lantern and a box of matches. An idea formed, desperate, but their only shot. "When it breaks through, I'll distract it. You light the lantern and throw it." Kyle's eyes widened. "Are you insane? That thing will kill you." "Just do it." David snapped. The door exploded inward, the creature barreling through in a frenzy. It was even more horrifying up close, its claws dripping with black fluid, its face twisted in a grotesque snarl. David swung the machete, aiming for its head, but it dodged with inhuman speed. It lashed out, its claws grazing his shoulder and sending him crashing into the wall. "Now, Kyle," David shouted, blood streaming down his arm. Kyle struck the match, his hands shaking violently, and lit the lantern. The creature turned toward him, its yellow eyes narrowing. With a scream, Kyle hurled the lantern at it. The glass shattered on impact, and flames erupted, engulfing the creature in a fiery blaze. It let out an otherworldly scream, thrashing wildly as the fire consumed it. David dragged Kyle out of the cabin as the flames spread, catching the dry wood. The two stumbled into the night, collapsing a safe distance away. Behind them, the cabin burned brightly, the creature's screams fading into silence. They sat in stunned silence, watching the fire. Kyle's camera dangled from his hand, still recording. "Did we kill it?" he asked, his voice barely audible. David didn't answer. He stared at the flames, his mind racing. The creature was gone, but the forest felt no safer. The oppressive silence had returned, heavier than before. When the sun rose, they made their way back to the car, their bodies aching and their minds scarred. Kyle reviewed the footage later, hoping for answers. The video was a chaotic blur of fear and fire, but the creature's grotesque form was unmistakable. They never spoke of it again, but the footage leaked online, sparking debates and fear. Some called it a hoax, others a warning. But David and Kyle knew the truth. The creature wasn't gone. It was waiting, biding its time, and they had barely survived the first encounter.